You are listening to the SDSU Football Podcast, presented by the East Village Times, with your hosts Andre Hagverdian and Paul Garrison. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the SDSU Football Podcast. I am your host, Andre Hagverdian, and will be joined shortly by my co-host, Paul Garrison. This is episode 60. And it's the first episode of 2023 that involves interviews with the coaching staff at San Diego State. We hope to have, as we get into spring camp and beyond, we hope to get a lot of the assistant coaches on the staff on the podcast for some interviews to talk about, how they see their position groups developing over the course of the spring. We obviously want to get the 3 new position coaches on so we can get to know them better. First up, though, is Adam Hall, the strength and conditioning coach, because right now, as they go through phase 1, winter conditioning, it is Adam Hall's program right now. 4 weeks or so of winter conditioning right before spring practice. Coach Hall basically has all the players' attention right now as he's putting them through his program. So Paul actually had a chance to catch up with Coach Hall recently. I was unable to make it, but Paul held it down. Hope you guys enjoy that. After the interview, Paul and I will talk about some of our key takeaways speaking with Coach Hall. And then we'll also talk about, some roster changes that we saw from an updated roster posted on the Go Aztecs website. Plus, Ryan Lindley was available to the media this week. Provided a lot of great insight. I was able to be there in person, so to kind of share a lot of the things that Coach Lindley talked about. So first up is Coach Hall's interview. So let's get to it.
Coach, thanks for taking the time to be able to talk with us today. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing all right, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. I know everything is just kicking off a week into winter conditioning, but before getting into that going forward, what are just some of your general thoughts about the 2022 season?
Okay, I think the 2022 season, we left a lot out there that we could have had. There are no excuses for it. It is what it is, but the whole point in this January coming back, we will mention last year, but right now all we're trying to do is get better for this year. And the last year wasn't good enough, which we all know. And the goal every January is to reset the foundation and move forward.
And so what is the foundation that you're resetting as you're building and looking forward to 2023?
Every year you inherit a brand new football team. Yes, some guys will have played a lot of football, but the 2022 team was last year. A lot of those, we had some great players. They graduated. They're going to go try their hand at the NFL. Every single January, you start from scratch. You build your own identity as a football team. Not every team is going to have the same personalities. So winter conditioning is basically to build your foundation moving into spring practice, build it in spring training, get it to the peak over summer conditioning, and then head into fall camp.
As you're going through the foundation, as you just described, are there some tweaking, some things that you learned from the season before that you're trying to address as you move into that conditioning and getting ready for 2023?
Yeah, obviously, we start to set the foundation. We've won around here because we have a bunch of guys that want to prove everybody wrong, right? Mm-hmm. And it's my job to make sure the team is on the same wavelength the whole year. So what I'm doing right now is I'm getting players on edge. I don't think, obviously we did not run the ball the same way we did in previous years. So that is, to me, that's a sticking point. Now, does that need to be stronger? Maybe. Does that need to be more explosive? Maybe. More agile? Maybe. But that, those are certain things I look at as a strength coach saying, how can we improve, moving people off the line of scrimmage? Things along those lines.
The last year when we talked at this time, you said something that really resonated with me. You said that what works at San Diego State may not work everywhere else. And you just kind of alluded to being on edge and proving people wrong. San Diego State is as a program externally is in flux. New stadium, new revenue that comes with it, all of the stuff that's coming about conference realignment. How do you approach doing things the San Diego State way and making your program be built for San Diego State when so much is changing externally in the program?
That's a great question, but for me, it's a very simple answer because I'm a pretty simple guy. I don't have social media. I don't do a lot of stuff socially. So I take the approach with the team is, notice also you'll never see us post anything from the weight room or our team runs online, any Twitter, any handles. That's because what we do is ours. So all the outside stuff that's going on, that makes absolutely no difference to my realm as a strength conditioning coach for this football team. The only thing we work on is us. It ain't about anybody else but us. And last year we let it be about other things during the season. It's not going to be that way anymore. We're not going to worry about anything other than ourselves, being the best version of ourselves, being mentally and physically tougher than we were last year. And then doesn't matter who we play or when we play them, we're going to go out there and play our best football.
Talking a little bit about last season still, and I know we're trying to push towards 2023, but last year, the 100th season, opening up a new stadium, I mean, that doesn't come along very often. In hindsight, did some of those things maybe present a little bit of a distraction and get people a little bit off of, what you're talking about right now?
I don't think so. I mean,
Okay.
I'd be the football position coaches would probably know more about that than I would.
Mm-hmm.
In my personal opinion, number one, Snapdragon is a beautiful stadium. It's probably the nicest stadium I've ever been in.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it was built on time in this city is absolutely an amazing testament to JD and our administration and all the people in the community that helped with it. But football is football. There will never be an excuse for us not playing our best football. And the fact that we were playing in a beautiful state-of-the-art stadium, we could be playing out in the sandlot. We should still play our best football, and we didn't. So I don't think the outside factors, if anything, as far as the stadium conference realignment, that should have brought more excitement, which would make that answer perplexing as to why we didn't play well. So I don't think it had anything to do with that.
Okay. When you look at the team, San Diego State finished, there were only 13 teams that had more penalties in the Aztecs last year. Now, some of them were Tennessee and Alabama, so it's not necessarily, about whether you're going to win or not. But are there certain penalties that you as the strength and conditioning coach say, okay, that's a lack of discipline, and so that's something that I can address, or is that just kind of an area that is more, again, from those position coaches?
No, I mean, that's something you address on a program-wide level, and that was addressed our very first round of winter conditioning. I made sure we stressed that point, and Coach Hoke was aware of that as well, but we started hitting on that right off the bat. It's just discipline. It's unforced errors. You can understand a physical error on the football field, right? Everybody makes them. When you're playing as hard as you can, you make a mistake. The unforced errors are unexcusable. And the amount that we were penalized last year, that cannot happen again. And we are definitely addressing that almost on a daily basis right now in the winter.
Just having never gone through a conditioning, how does something like that addressed in the conditioning?
Well, I mean, it's not like the old days are gone, right? Because of different ways. But there are ways you can do it as a human being where the guys that you are training are well aware of the importance of a snap count, or the importance of paying attention, the importance of the smallest detail in the world that could cost us a football game, whether it's controlling your emotions or staying on sides or not false starting, all those sorts of things. Those are controllable errors. So I put the players in a position when they are very fatigued that they have to think. Anybody can think when they're fresh, right? And you're calm. Yeah. When your adrenaline picks up, or when you get tired, those are the times when those errors happen. So the positions that I'm putting them in are times where they have to concentrate and they have to think and they have to do it right.
When an early enrollee coming straight from high school, he's 17, 18 years old, and they're participating in what they're doing with you guys, is there anything that's altered knowing that just where they're at in terms of their age and their growth or anything like that, maybe comparing that to, an incoming transfer?
I mean, we will watch them. We monitor them. That all the new guys coming into the program, I'll put them in a white T-shirt. So I know exactly where they are at all times. Obviously, you don't come in going 100 miles per hour that first week, because whether they're a mid-year guy or they're a guy that just played 300 snaps over the football season, some of these guys take some time down. They take some time off. They let their bodies recover. So your first week, you're ramping back up, right? So obviously, yes, I want them to be a part of the team. So I want them to feel how the team feels, but they are constantly monitored and they are constantly noticed because they're wearing a different shirt. So we can see their progress. We can see how they're feeling, so on and so forth.
So then I guess the converse of that is a player who's, been in the program, who's not in one of those white shirts. What maybe advantages do they have as you're ramping up and doing this process of relaying the foundation again?
And that's interesting. That's an approach that I have. Everybody on the team is treated the exact same, right? But I expect the guys that are wearing the black shirts that have been here, they know the expectations. They know what to do. They know what I'm looking for. The guys in the white shirts don't. They do now. They've been here about a week and a half now. We've been training for about a week and a half. They know now. Mm-hmm. But everybody's going through very similar workouts. I just look, there's a level of expectation that I have for the guys wearing the black shirts. And in about 24 hours, being at our second Wednesday, going down to the weight room, no, not even 24 hours. They'll be in there at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I expect them to have that same standard now as well. So everybody's working out together. The guys in the white shirts stick out so that I can notice them. I can watch their movement patterns. I can watch them on the field and make sure they're doing okay. But after about a week and a half, they're part of the group, and it's time to go.
How long did it take for you to develop what you just described? And it seems like given, the transfer portal and people moving a lot more than in years past, that it seems like a real genius way to be able to approach that kind of movement. As
far as, you mean just
white shirt, black shirt? No, white shirt, black shirt, being able to give the extra support to the newer players. I mean, it seems like a very good way to do that at a very needed time, given the fact that there is so much flux on rosters nowadays. Yeah, there is. And I mean, it's pretty simple. Like I said, I'm a pretty simple guy. There's other places you go, they'd have a special workout group for them, and they would bring them in a lot slower than the other guys. We do ours in a very safe way, in communication constantly with athletic medicine and our head athletic trainer. But these guys are coming in to compete for a spot. Mm-hmm. Last year we didn't play good enough. These guys are coming in here because we want them to play. That's why they're coming in as mid-years. So, yes, they are. I monitor them because I don't know them like I know the other guys. I know some of these other guys like the back of my hand because I've been with them for a long time. Those guys are put in a white shirt because I want to see how they respond to things in different ways. But at the same time, I have to get them ready to compete in spring practice, which starts February 20th. So there's a fine line of getting somebody into a program and getting them ready to play. And that's the line you got to balance. I know other schools do it differently, but this is the way that we do it, and it works for us. Looking at the way that the roster is presently configured, there's 34 upperclassmen, 51 underclassmen, a generally pretty small junior class. Is that typical of that kind of a breakdown, and does that change the dynamic given the fact that you have so many younger players relative to the older guys? The classes are all. It's more of a question for a player personnel guy, but the classes are all in flux and they're fluid because of COVID. Right. So everybody that came in, they might have another year. So they're listed as a junior, but I've been around them for 4 years. So I know they're a senior, but they're still listed as a junior because they have another year of COVID eligibility. Right. The roster in reality
it looks like that on paper, but when I'm coaching these guys in person, there are plenty of upperclassmen. They're just not listed as old as they would normally be.
Okay.
Because of the COVID season. Now, with that being said, we lost a lot of production from a lot of seniors last year that played a lot of football for San Diego State. And their spots are going to be filled with a bunch of guys that have not played as much ball. And that aspect, yes, it is. It's a much different type of year than some years. However, going into last year, we were replacing, I think, 8 or 9 guys that made NFL teams, whether it was practice squad or active rosters. So it's really a normal pattern.
Gotcha. That's good to know, because it's something that's difficult for me, as I said, on paper, to be able to look through that and be able to kind of discern that.
Hey, Paul, it confuses me every day looking at these classes right now. I mean, because of COVID year, not COVID year. I mean, it is a battle that everybody's fighting.
Well, I appreciate the understanding. Couple of players specifically that I'd like to talk to you about. Obviously, Jalen Maiden and everything that he was able to do last year. What changes for him going from the safety room to working with the quarterback?
He got to throw a ball again. That's one thing. I don't think Jalen Maiden threw a pass for a long time. You know,
right.
he was a safety from. That was the entire winter of 22 all the way through, what was that, September, October last year?
Yeah, that's right.
So the biggest thing for him is training wise, it was very similar, right? More for him was on the football side of meetings, practice, walkthroughs, things like that. In my world, it was the same. Jalen has worked hard since he's been here. He would tell you it was an enormous change for him coming from where he was to where he is now about, you know, how we did things. But I'll tell you what, that guy has done every single thing right since he's been here. He's fun to coach. He's a team guy, which isn't very common at that position, the quarterback position, you know, these days.
Mm-hmm.
But he's about the team, and I can't say enough good things about him. Now, like I said, I don't usually talk about individual players, but what he did last year was pretty damn special.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows, you know, he's very consistent. He's extremely consistent in his work ethic. He's incredibly unselfish. Things were very hard for him, like I said, when he got here, but what he does is he just keeps working. He just keeps working. One of my old coaches said, he just keeps chopping wood, just keeps going forward. And that's what he did, and he has absolutely earned everything he's received. And he's fun to coach.
So is there anything, you know, from a training standpoint that maybe, you know, arm strength, different things like that are going to be able to come back through the training, or you know, is it not quite that specific in what you do?
I think really what helps arm strength, number one, all the guys do a tremendous amount of external, internal, shoulder work, upper back, neck, trap, core. Everybody does that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to get really comfortable throwing the ball if you don't throw the ball, especially for an 8-month span, right? So what he has now is he's throwing on a consistent basis from January up until August. So he will. I mean, if that's something that happens, I'll tell you, no matter what I used to do, my arm was my arm, you know, when I used to play quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that I could throw the ball, and quarterbacks get better at throwing the ball by actually throwing the ball. And so this year he'll actually get to throw the ball January through July in preparation for August.
2 more questions, Coach. We had Joseph Hall, a new incoming, one of those guys who's in the white shirt. But he has a pretty unique story coming from the Marines. And we talked with his coach from Saddleback, and he talked about, you know, those hard days, those difficult days, and what his life experience can mean to just younger guys, and being able to say, you know, you think this is hard. You know, I was on 2 deployments and those kinds of things. Just not maybe about Joseph specifically because it's so new, unless you've seen it, of course, but just having somebody from the military and just adding that to the mix, what kind of thing could that mean to the program and what you're trying to do?
I actually got a chance to talk to Joseph very briefly, kind of his first week here. And I'll tell you exactly what I told him. I said, Joseph, I took him to the side. I said, I have a tremendous amount of respect for what you did for this country, the dedication, the commitment that it took. I said, I come from a military family. I am extremely, extremely thankful that you're on this team. And I tapped him on the chest. I said, but I'm gonna treat you like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he wouldn't like it any other way. So obviously he is he's in the mix now with our guys. There's always that. He'll always have something that nobody else will have because he put his life on the line, right? The other guys have played the game of football. Joseph played the game of war. And I think that will only help him and as he continues to develop to hopefully be a productive member of our football team. You know, because I think his story is incredible. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him and what he did for our country. But right now, Joseph's on the San Diego State football team, right? So he's working hard every single day to earn his spot so he can go out there and be productive for us in the fall.
Great answer. You know, you mentioned being a former quarterback, obviously with the Aztecs, but another former quarterback, Ryan Lindley, was moved to offensive coordinator this offseason, and just that fraternity of San Diego State quarterbacks and being able to be a part of that. Just your thoughts on Ryan and where his career has gone and what he can mean for the program this year and then going forward. Well,
first off, Ryan was a hell of a lot better quarterback than I was. Right. So let's just get that out of it. And Kevin O'Connell's one of my best buddies too. So I've been dealing with playing third fiddle all the time. But it's great. I mean, you get a local guy, started 4 years, all-time leading passer, all those, them, that, days, and those. You know, all that stuff aside, Ryan Lindley, he loves football. Mm-hmm. And when you get a guy that loves football, that is a student of the game, that is so knowledgeable by the people he's been around in college, professionally, and his stops at Utah, Mississippi State, he's seen a lot of ball. And the really good football coaches, the more they see on whatever side of the ball they work on, the bigger their imaginations get for what they can do when it's their turn. I mean, I'm 41. I was talking to Ryan today. He's only 33 years old. And I think it is awesome for him. Yeah. I'm very excited. Obviously, I know Ryan and his family, and I think he's going to do a tremendous job.
I think everyone who comes in contact with Coach Lindley thinks the same. Coach Hall, thank you for the time. I know it's a busy season for you, and good luck with the rest of winter conditioning, and just, again, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul.
All right, Paul, we had our first coaches interview of 2023. Adam Hall, a returning guest on the podcast. Thank you for conducting that interview. I was unable
Got it, brother.
I had a chance to listen to it. Very interesting. It's always good to hear about a side of the program that you don't hear too much about or see too much about. And, you know, Coach Hall is someone that's like well respected between the coaches, the players. He's a former Aztec player himself. People listen to him. People trust him, which is obviously the only way that his program is going to work. I love how, you know, part of his mantra is at the beginning of January to get players on edge. They're coming back from, you know, New Year's and Christmas. The season's over. They feel they're relaxing. And like right away, he wants to get them back on edge in order to get them ready for spring camp. So I thought that it was a very interesting conversation. What do you think?
I really appreciated Adam's time with us, Coach Hall's time with us, just because, you know, it's not necessarily. I think there's a lot of intentionality with what he does. He's not doing this for media views. He's not doing this because he wants to get any accolades. It's about the players. It's about getting them better. It's about the process that they get to have. And for him to develop young men that's his passion. That's what he wants to do. So to kind of go a little bit off that script, right? Because, you know, doesn't necessarily get to any benefit for that aim to talk to us, but just for that opportunity, you know. And I think, you know, for a second year in a row, I thought that was really, really, like, I think it's just important from the vision of what we're trying to do, which is to cover San Diego State year round. those 4 phases that Coach Hoke is always talking about. It's those, off the field phases that are tougher to kind of pin down, like what's going on, what are the players doing, and that's intentional, right? But at the same time, I thought he gave some really, really good windows into his thought process, who he is, what the players are going through, and then I think that the highlights of the interview was just, I thought he just for a little bit, he took off the strength and conditioning coach hat, and he put on the like SDSU quarterback fraternity there, and for him to speak about in very similar terms, man, and just the tone in his voice, Jalen Maiden and Ryan Lindley, I thought were pretty good, and just really insightful into the kind of people that they are. And I thought it also, brought a little bit of Adam Hall's personality across too.
Yeah, well, one of the things I was really curious about that you thankfully asked him was how they treat new players in the program, particularly early enrollees, guys that should be still in high school. They're probably not 18. Right now, guys like Jelani McLaughlin and Marcus Ratcliffe, I believe, are the 2 early enrollees, at least that we know of. Those guys should still be in high school, and now they're in a winter conditioning program with Coach Hall. That can be a shock to the system. So I liked how he talked about how he puts them in white shirts, he monitors them, but he doesn't necessarily put them in the corner by themselves to not get fully acclimated, but he just has to monitor them. I don't know if that's just a common thing that happens. It does sound like it's not
right
necessarily. So I was curious how they handled that portion of it. But if I have to say, the most fascinating part of the interview was his discussion about penalties.
Yeah.
I've been part of the media credential for San Diego State now for the last 2 football seasons. 2021 was a bad year in penalties. 2022 was a bad year of penalties. In 2021, I felt like after every game during a press conference, I was asking Coach Hoke about penalties. How are you going to fix the penalties? And you would always get this coach speak, and Coach Hoke is never going to throw players under the bus. He's always going to say, we need to coach better. We need to do a better job. And I always thought to myself, like, we had a running joke, right, internally about, like, when Brady Hoke sees me, he thinks, oh, he's going to ask me about penalties again, right? But I always thought to myself, like, how can coaches really solve penalties? It's a player's thing to have to solve, like, a face mask or a holding or things like that. And I thought Adam Hall's perspective about fatigue, anyone can think when they're fresh and they're calm, but when you put them through things when they're fatigued is when they make the mistakes. And how he does that in his program pushes them to their limits. And then he didn't specify what he does, but then he makes them have to think or make them have to do something when they're fatigued, and to build that concentration and that focus. I thought that was fascinating.
No, I agree with you. And it's interesting, for the article that I wrote about it, I went back and I went through every game and I looked at every penalty, right? Talk about having no time on your hands. I counted them, I was every one of them, little tally marks and the whole bit. Then I went back and I looked at the number of penalties since 2013. As bad as it may have seemed, that's kind of that's the edge. I think that a little bit of the edge that Coach Hall was speaking about, that this team is not going to play it safe. And when you go full speed, you're just bound to be able to make some of those full speed mistakes. I think, though, what separated last year from the years before is, number one, they weren't good enough to overcome them. I think that's one thing that was pretty clear. And then I think the other part that was pretty clear is a lot of them were procedural penalties. It's almost like they cleaned up a ton of what took place in 2021.
Yeah.
But this other thing popped up that wasn't there in 2021. And that youth and inexperience, along the offensive line, it's an easy thing to point to. And certainly that was a factor, and that was there. But as I was going through there and looking at, I believe it's 37 false starts, Jesse Matthews is in there. Mark Redmond is in there more than once. False starts on the center. I mean, these are things that it was everywhere, regardless of whether, in addition to some of the youth. Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon was there a lot. It was, I think, a little bit bigger than just, hey, you got some young players on the offensive line. They've never seen this before, so now they're kind of nervous, or they're in a bigger stadium environment. I think it was a little bit more systemic, and so the fact that they are looking to address it, and this just has not been a problem that the Aztecs have had in multiple years, and so I think that they're going to be able to get it under control. At least that part of it, I think, is going to be a lot better into this season, and it just so many times they would be first and goal at the 2, and then they're first and goal at the 7. And it just completely changes the smash mouth. Like, we're going to get 3/4 of a yard, but we're going to score in 2 plays kind of a deal, 3 plays, and so I just think that it'll work, and, the Aztecs will be better for it.
You mentioned the Jalen Maiden thing. To get better at throwing the ball, you have to actually throw the ball. Jalen didn't throw a ball for 8 months, and then comes to practice, and 5 days later is starting quarterback against Hawaii. And so we've talked about this, about having an off season as a quarterback and building upon that habits. And I think winter conditioning is a big part of that. Just getting accustomed to throwing the ball, being a quarterback, that muscle memory as well. Winter conditioning is not a lengthy process, right? It started a week ago. I think it's a 4-week, maybe 3.5 weeks, really, up until spring camp. So there's not a lot of time. And so Coach Hall has to be meticulous every day with making sure he's getting what he needs to get across to everybody on the team, day in and day out.
Well said. And I think that I think the philosophy that they use, it just comes across in a lot that they do, including the fact that they play such an early spring, because they could stretch this out if they wanted to, right? They could be playing, they call it spring, but it's February. You know what I mean? Like they're playing this month. Like, it's not, they intentionally do that. And then they stretch out the summer, allow people to heal, all that kind of stuff, which, as physical as they are, you can see the wisdom in that, and getting some space in between. But
when you mentioned that, it kind of reminded me of Ryan Lindley's press conference today at San Diego State. He talked about how they have an early spring camp because in San Diego in mid-February, the weather, you can have spring practice with no weather issues. Where in Michigan, New York, some places on the East Coast, in mid-February, you're probably still battling snow, maybe.
Sure.
And so, which is why they have an early one compared to other things. And he kind of was talking about how, the spring practice will give them a chance to tell the players, instill some of the offense and the terminology, but they'll have a lot of time after spring practice before the summer to tweak a lot of the things that either worked, didn't work, or more things that they can teach in the classroom setting than they could on the football field. So he definitely talked about how that early spring camp might actually be a benefit while they're installing kind of a newer system.
That makes sense, but that's a great segue. Andre, you were down at the press conference talking to the new offensive coordinator at San Diego State on the side of the basketball court.
Yeah, a lot of basketballs bouncing.
A lot of basketballs bouncing. So you were down there, man. Just like starting off this portion of it, what was your main takeaway from Coach Lindley and what he had to say?
He talked a lot about the people that he has learned from. You forget he's a young guy, but he's been through NFL, college. He's learned from a lot of offensive minds. Mike Leach, everyone knows about that. Bruce Arians, when he was a player. Andy Ludwig, he talked a lot about what he's learned from Andy Ludwig when he was at Utah about what you need to do Monday through Friday to be ready for Saturday's game. And he learned that from him. He mentioned Todd Monken, who was the offensive coordinator with the Browns when he was the quarterback coach.
Right.
Todd Monken is I believe the highest priced offensive coordinator in college football, and a 2-time defending champion at Georgia.
Yeah.
And hopefully the next offensive coordinator for the second time with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He just interviewed for them. So
I got it.
Todd Monken is, and when it comes to college offensive coordinators, he's at the top of the game right now. He also mentioned something interesting for Chargers fans. I know San Diego doesn't want to hear a lot of Chargers stuff, but he talked about how when he was with the Chargers, his little limited time with the Chargers, he played with Phillip Rivers, and his offensive coordinator was Frank Reich, and his quarterback coach was Nick Sirianni, who is now coaching in the Super Bowl next week. And Frank Reich I think, was the offensive coordinator for the Eagles when they won the Super Bowl a couple years ago.
I think that's right.
Now he's the coach of the Carolina Panthers. So you all these guys who have had massive success, NFL and college on the offensive side, that he's learned from and he's picking and choosing from. He plays it coy when people ask him, what's going to be your philosophy?
Sure.
And he kind of jokes about why he plays coy, about he wants to stay mysterious. He doesn't want to give it all the way to the teams he's going to be playing. But, the thing he says repeatedly is, we want to do what our players do best. We're going to have a system that fits our players and not necessarily try to make players fit our system, and they may not be good at it. We hope to get him on the podcast again and get a even more deeper conversation. But he has a lot of good insight about specific positional units and things like that.
Well, it reminded me as you were talking about something that Adam Hall said, describing all the places that Coach Lindley has been. And then he ended with this line. He says, the really good football coaches, the more they see on whatever side of the ball they work on, the bigger their imaginations get for what they can do when it's their turn. And I think that describes what you're talking about. All right, so let me ask you about this then. We've had this conversation, and maybe it's up for, we could have more of a debate. But I think that one of the questions that was asked about Jalen Mayden when he was, the first 5 games was, how on earth could this guy have been behind Jordan Brookshire and Lucas Johnson? Like, how did that happen? That question stopped at the end of the season. And I think that I would argue that if you were to take their whole body of work, the Aztecs got better QB play from Brookshire and from Johnson than they did from Mayden, because he turned the ball over so much. And so what did Coach Lindley have to say about that aspect and just where Jalen Mayden is in his game?
Lindley was very open and transparent about the turnovers towards the end of the season, kind of taking some of the blame himself and saying that he was pushing, Jalen out of his comfort level, and he was asking him to be less conservative and be more aggressive, pushing the ball down the field, and that's potentially where those turnovers came. And he kind of called it like, for developmental purposes, it was good, but for game result, it was bad. And he takes some of the blame for that. Jalen had just, even though he was playing well, they were asking him to do simple things, right, in the first few games. And then they asked him to do a little bit more, and maybe it was a little bit too much too soon, considering he hadn't been quarterback for 8 months. So Lindley was definitely very transparent about taking a lot of that blame for kind of pushing Mayden and that offense, the mentality to be a little bit more aggressive when maybe it was not the right time for it. Now he thinks that that's going to have to be a comfort level in the comfort zone for Jalen this year if they want to get to where they want to get to. But, to him, that was too much too soon towards the end of the last season, and that's what led to the turnovers. Now he also admits that, Jalen could have made better plays, could have controlled the ball a little bit better as well. But, he also said about how Jalen took those last 2 games really hard, was very hard on himself. It's funny, Ryan Lindley talked about how he played baseball growing up. And the thing about baseball that's better than football, in his words, was you play baseball, you go 0 for 4 one game, you get another game the next day, you can go 4 for 4, and suddenly you're hitting 500, right, for those 2 games. Where in football, you got a week. Or if you play a bowl game, guess what? You don't have a game for 9 months, and you have to sit and think about it. And that's what happened to Jalen, and that really, he worked himself up especially the last 2 games. But I thought it was really refreshing to hear Ryan kind of shoulder some of that blame and talk about a lot about, because it's not something you always necessarily hear from a position coach about that.
No, it's great. So what you're saying is that the way they designed, what was going on with the offense, a big portion of that was with their eye on 2023.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't necessarily say that those exact words.
Development, though, right?
But yeah, the development, yeah, definitely.
Okay, because I think that was part of our conversations that we had during that time, was just like, that was such a weird game plan. Like, why did they throw it 40 times and they're not running the ball?
Yeah,
we said, like, are they doing it for development for Maiden? Are they doing it for, because Jeff Horton is going to be his swan song games, and it's just like, let's do our whole bag here. But to hear that for the first time that the coaching staff is saying that, yeah, that was part of the game plan, and we were doing that. Something with that Adam Hall pointed out, and he wants to be, I think rightfully, a little bit secretive about what are they paying attention to and all that stuff, in the same way that Ryan Lindley, wants other coaches to have to be good and do their homework to find a game plan. So just that secretive nature of it is beyond understood. But one of the things that he did bring up, and I think it's just because, it's so synonymous with San Diego State, is he said, man, we did not run the football. And he gave reasons why that could be and what he's thinking about, but he didn't want to fully give what his assessment of it was. What did Coach Lindley, or did he say about, running the football, the running backs who are there, why they didn't go out and get, a transfer portal guy or any of those topics in the press conference?
I did. I asked him about exactly that. You lost your 2 most experienced running backs to graduation, Jordan Bird, Chance Bell. Some thought you might bring in an experienced running back in the portal. They didn't. Some thought you might bring in an incoming high school senior / freshman. They didn't sign a running back. Now Tyson Berry is kind of that hybrid running back wide receiver, but he's listed as wide receiver, so I'm not including him in that. And I said, does that show that the staff has confidence in those 5 guys? And he said, absolutely. And he immediately mentioned Lucky Sutton and Sheldon Canley, and about how the defensive guys have been raving about those 2 guys for what they did on the scout team last year and how talented they are. I think the staff have a lot of confidence in those 2 guys, which says everything you need to know about why they didn't bring in another running back. He also mentioned Jalen Armstead, but said we need him to be more consistent, which might be some of the reasons why Armstead didn't get a lot of carries after he returned from his ankle injury towards the end of the season. Mentioned Cam Davis as a situational guy that can maybe play some of that hybrid Jordan Bird role. But yeah, the way he talked about Lucky Sutton and Sheldon Canley tells me that those 2 guys, are going to be vying for that lead back role.
It's interesting. I wasn't there. I'll definitely have to listen to it and, get my opinion. But it sounds to me, man, like he's fitting in with the staff really good. Yeah. Because for years, the highest praise is reserved for the youngest guys or the fully established guys, the guys who have already done it, been there, done that. And the guys that they really need to improve and jump up, that's what they're going to talk about. You didn't mention Keenan Christian. What was his remark about him?
He didn't list Keenan. I think it was just his
on the fly. Yeah,
on the fly. Yeah, he didn't mention Keenan, but I think Keenan. We saw that guy's fast.
Yeah.
And any offensive coordinator is going to walk in there and be like, "We need to get this guy the ball in space."
Yeah.
I have no doubt Keenan is going to be a part of that offense. More maybe like the passing game and screens and things like that, but.
No, absolutely, and I think that's the interesting part about spring camp, right? Is the quarterbacks are all going to be in green jerseys, but the running backs aren't. They're going to have an opportunity to really play and to be able to see who can have that consistency and who kind of sets himself up as that lead guy. I guess the one, any other takeaways that you heard from that interview that you were thinking about?
Yeah, I also asked him about the offensive line. Obviously they're much maligned from last year. They brought in a one JUCO guy, but they also, they have an all-conference first-team center to replace, and they didn't bring in an experienced guy there. And he said he's really excited about the 5 guys. He included Tommy Mirabella in there that are returning, about the strides he saw from them. Even Josh Simmons, even though he still had his penalty issues, he's really excited about that. I think that's still, the jury's still out on that offensive line.
Completely.
The coach obviously is going to say they're excited about him because those are the players they've got and they're talented guys. But that's still an area that I think you'd have to be concerned about heading into spring camp. We saw a lot of those guys play last year, and it was inconsistent. So we need to see it on the field, starting with spring camp. And he talked about how spring camp is going to be a big part of that improvement. He didn't mention, by name who that replacement center is going to be, the new starting center. They might not know yet. They might know and might not want to say. So he didn't give that away, but we've talked about this obviously a lot of times. That's going to be the key to unlocking the offense. He wants he wants to be explosive and efficient. And in order to do that, you need to have a good offensive line. We'll see. I think my concern level is still high on the offensive line heading into spring camp. And I think the coaches still have some ways to go in trying to figure that out.
Until they prove it completely, I think that's something always to look at and pay attention to. But I will say there's a lot more stability. There's a lot more stability in this spring camp than there was before. Again, it's the same old thing. Like, can they, with greater experience, become better, right? Because, here's the thing, is that you look at every one of those players that are returning starters, with the exception of Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon, maybe Cade Bennett, they weren't supposed to play last year. Well, this is the year that they're supposed to play. This is their third year of college football, which is where Cade Bennett got to play. And he obviously was arguably their best offensive lineman. That's where, Josh Simmons is going to be now, right? That's where Ross Masuli is going to be now. And so I think that stability should help them, but it's obviously going to be a storyline going forward. So,
final point on the offensive line, you're absolutely right. Last year, heading into the season, they only had 2 offensive linemen that had more than 40 snaps in Division I football.
Right.
A lot different this year. I think they have 6 of the 7 guys that got the most snaps last year are all back. Alamalu is the only one. So experience-wise, snaps-wise, even though they're still sophomores or juniors, that experience is going to be key. It's just a matter of fine-tuning it and making sure you've got the guys in the right spots moving forward.
Yep, agreed. So tell me this, shifting to the other thing, a roster came out. The roster, honestly, usually is not even out at this point, but they're, they got it out a little bit early, and it's been a little bit in flux and different things like that. But I thought there were some really interesting nuggets on the roster. And the first one confirmed from the school is that Kyron White has been moved to linebacker. Kyron White, who's 5'11", 210, never quite. At one point, I shouldn't say this, at the beginning of fall camp, he was looked at as being maybe like the primary backup, even at all the safety positions. Got injured and has never really gotten into the mix in the Warrior safety area. And even when there was trouble there at the beginning of the year, it was Devon Celestine who came up and kind of really solidified that position. Even after Kyron White's healthy and stuff like that, he doesn't go back there. He's not in that mix. And then, he starts against Air Force because he plays safety. We took it as they just put in an extra safety. But no, they put an extra linebacker in. He was rotating with Vi Cajo. It wasn't two different. They played the same thing that they did the year before where they had 4 linebackers in instead of 3. And he just happened to be the linebacker. They really liked him there. But I think
Brady, you asked Brady, I think after the game, and he called it a boundary linebacker role. Right?
He did, but it didn't make sense.
Backer.
He did a boundary backer. That's what he called it. And and it's interesting that you bring that up, because when I asked Coach Hoke about it, I tried to ask it as if Vaikaho and Kyron Wright were playing a different position. And he answered it like they weren't. And it didn't make sense to me until I realized that it was actually, he's the guy who moved to linebacker. But I think, just with teams spreading it out, for them to be able to have a guy, and that's what Kyron White has done. I mean, he's done it a little bit too much with his helmet, and he's not get ejected, for targeting. But I think he's a really good football player. I was honestly pleasantly surprised for the team that he didn't transfer, because, one safety did when Patrick Morris decided to come back. CJ Baskerville is very much in that same mold as being, kind of that hitting physical kind of safety in the same way Kyron White is. And so I thought it would be Kyron White because he's a senior, right? He's only going to have potentially that COVID year after this year. I thought he would be the one to transfer because of that, if any of those were going to. And so just the idea that, you look at the depth at the safety position, and we've talked about this, like this is your deepest position. And then you add a transfer from Texas, and you're like, man, how many numbers they have. And then the young safeties that you talk about that, we're confirming that they're in camp and stuff like that, but told us that they were going to be enrolling early, and this they're phenomenal recruits and all this stuff. And the guys from last year, but then to think that, man, they could actually get all of those guys on the field at the same time. I think somewhere Coach Maddox I can just kind of see him like smiling, like with all the possibilities and all the things that he can do. So that was, I think, my biggest takeaway.
On third down passing situations, think about Cooper McDonald moving to defensive end and bringing Kyron White in as a third linebacker with Moon and Fiaseu or potentially New Zealand Williams. Having that ability, there's a lot of things they can do, obviously. And that's something they've done. Cooper played defensive end on some third and longs as a third defensive lineman with his hand down, so he could do that. Well, yeah, a lot of things Coach Maddox is probably drawing up. He's on the drawing board trying to figure out everything he can cook up.
That's funny. I always picture him on napkins.
Yeah, napkin drawing board. We'll see.
Dirt, get whatever to do. But you know what? I really think that you can see the impact of Sagunalube. I mean, he's a guy who came in as a safety. Even his senior year, they tried him there for a week until they realized that Patrick McMorris was Patrick McMorris, and moved him back to linebacker. But that's what he did, and he played that kind of role in third and long for sure, and just as a little bit of a change of pace, I think at the minimum, I think you can see Kyron White there. But I mean, he's a big guy, 210. It makes him, that's as a weak side linebacker. That's not like he can, as long as he can get off some blocks and stuff like that, he should be all right. But it's just an opportunity to potentially get, your best defenders on the field and see what they can do. But I thought that was really, really an interesting thing. What about you, man? Anything that jumped out to you on the roster?
Yeah, twofold. One is there were 3 true freshmen from last year that did not redshirt. Max Garrison, who obviously played special teams. So, I mean, that was not a surprise. Chris Johnson, corner, and Eric Butler, safety. Those guys are now listed as sophomores, so they played more than 4 games. But Josh Hunter redshirted, and a lot of the quarterbacks, Liu and Kyle Crum, everybody else. But those are the 3 guys that technically did not redshirt. And then the other one was, we've heard about people entering the transfer portal that left the team, and they made their announcements or they showed up on the portal. A couple guys who were not on the roster that we have not seen portal stuff. Kyle Trombley, who was injured all of last year. We had heard that he was, not going to play football anymore due to medical issues, so he's not on the roster. Jonathan Harrison is another guy that kind of dropped off the depth chart on the offensive line. He is off the team. And then the other guy, which, kind of holds a special place for me, is Avery Hart. Not necessarily because he was a big part of the team. Like, he hadn't seen the field yet in his 2 years. I don't know if he would have seen the field, but he was the first guy I interviewed and wrote an article on at East Village Times. So that's something I'm always going to remember, that name and that person.
Yeah.
And, despite the fact that it didn't quite work out for him at San Diego State, wish him the best moving forward. We don't know where he's headed or what he's looking to do in terms of playing football, but that was a guy, not seeing him on the roster and trying to figure out why. He was the first article I wrote, so definitely a name from that means something to me.
All right, give me one as we're closing this out, man. Give me one under the radar player that you are going to keep an eye on in spring camp and whenever we're able to get out there to be able to talk about. And as you're thinking about that, also want to mention that Lucky Avenger came back. Another super senior who was injured. We have the picture of him on senior night, but that he came back and gets to continue to play with his brother. His sister obviously is a star on the basketball team, and that he's keeping that going and getting to play another year. I think is pretty cool, man. I just think that that opportunity to play with your sibling is second to none. So who is maybe an under the radar guy?
I don't know if this would fit under the radar because we have talked about him before, but Ryan Henderson would be my guy.
Oh, there you go. Good call. Okay. Why is that?
I really liked what I saw. Obviously, he came in heavily recruited, his film in high school. He has the body. He had the body to play last year, I think, in terms of size and weight. He looked good in the scrimmages we saw. Obviously, we talked a lot about how there's openings on the defensive line. They brought in transfers, which are obviously could keep Ryan off the field, but I think he's ready. And Brady Hoke mentioned Ryan Henderson towards the end of the season when he was asked about, some of the young guys that could get looks in the bowl game that would be important next year. And, he mentioned Ryan Henderson without being asked about Ryan Henderson. So I remember that stood out to me too. And I think that defensive tackle position, or maybe if he can slide over to end. So I'm interested in seeing him if I had to pick someone on the defensive side.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give you a couple. First of all, seeing that Coach Lindley wants to build his offense around the strength of his players. Don't forget that Breon Penny was a wing T quarterback in high school. Yeah. So, San Diego State might be going to some triple option, like Air Force. Rocky Long would be so proud of her in Syracuse if they did that. No, but seriously, the guy that I really enjoy watching play that is just I want to see if it is that Zachariah Ramirez. He's a kicker, 5'10", 150. He crushes the ball from the smallest guy that you would imagine. And so I just want to see what a year of a full off season program lifting of doing all that kind of stuff and to see if he's going to be killing the ball in the same way. So that's kind of an under the radar kind of guy more. And one, obviously that was a joke, but then I think the other thing that I'm really wanting to pay attention to is I think that there is going to be a pretty good tight end battle. I think that, you look at Gus McGee, Cameron Harpel, and seeing as Aaron Green as who's going to be that third tight end. And then if one of those guys could sneak into that second role, but I think that's going to be pretty fun. But man, thanks for doing the interview with Coach Lindley and repping us there.
Two names that Coach Lindley brought up today. Mark Redmond, he talked a lot about Mark Redmond being involved in the passing game. Coach Heck talked a lot about Daniel Bellinger being involved in Redmond. So I don't want to say that that's, now they're going to get the tight end involved. They've always wanted to. They just haven't happened. But, Mark Redmond could have that ability. They didn't bring any tight ends in addition to no running backs. They brought no tight ends in. But a name that Coach Lindley brought up that might fit the under the radar is Josh Nicholson.
Oh, okay. Speedster.
He mentioned Mekhi Shaw and Breon Penny as returners from the wide receivers, but then he said Josh Nicholson. He loves how he's running in winter conditioning, what he's doing, and he's really excited about seeing him in spring camp. So that could fit your criteria as an under the radar guy.
Without question. And I remember his I think it was him. I was looking at his high school tape. He didn't look fast. And then we were talking about him last off, with Coach Cooper and all these guys and just saying like, oh my goodness, these guys are so fast. It's Josh Nicholson. He's like might be the fastest guy on the team. You're like, oh my goodness. So he's one of those guys that don't look fast because it's easy speed, And yeah, so I think all that kind of stuff is going to be so interesting to see. I thought last year that Coach Horton, I think if there was anything that he did a great job on, I think there's numerous things, but one of them was how he seamlessly integrated seemingly the offense that he wanted to run with what they had been practicing the whole year. And it'll be really interesting to see how many of those components are in there in what Ryan Lindley chooses to do. And, if some of those fullback things will be there that they tried, or what different shapes it'll be able to take. But amazingly, some of those questions will be answered here shortly because spring camp is right around the corner.
Absolutely. I think we're all excited about that. We should also mention before we get out of here, National Signing Day was this week. San Diego State had already signed 21 folks, so they only signed one on National Signing Day. Kenneth Giles, a JUCO defensive end from Hocking College in Ohio. We are in the middle of trying to schedule an interview with Kenneth, so hopefully in the near future we will have him on a future episode shortly. And by my count, I think San Diego State has one scholarship open, if I did the math correctly, given all the departures and the incoming guys. So, there might be more after spring camp. There's another transfer window in the late spring for guys in the programs that, might see the writing on the wall from spring camp that want to transfer out, or guys who want to transfer in. So that's kind of where the spring roster seems to be fairly set for now. Things will change, obviously, come fall, but that's kind of where San Diego State is at the moment. All right, that's going to do it for us. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed the interview with Coach Hall. We hope to have some more interviews with the coaches as well coming up over the next few weeks as we get into spring camp. I hope you guys enjoyed some of our thoughts about Coach Lindley and the roster, and we will talk to you guys next time. You are listening to the SDSU Football Podcast, presented by the East Village Times, with your hosts Andre Hagverdian and Paul Garrison.